am Mark, and this is Crystal, and we're doing the Journeys podcast on Mark for Glory Advocacy Media, Season 2, Episode 35, I think, 34, 35. We're here with Gary Shaughnessy, who has Parkinson's disease, and he's going to talk to us a bit about his journey and what life's like for him now living with Parkinson's. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Crystal. Good to speak to you.
Me too. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us. First off, Gary, let's start. Maybe you can tell us a bit about your early life and your upbringing and what your life was like leading up to your diagnosis.
Well, I was a pretty unremarkable early life. My father, actually, though, was one of 14 children who came over from Ireland to the UK and married my mother, who was a nurse, and he was an engineer, she was a nurse, and she was an only child. So slightly unusual mix of one of 14 and one on their own. I've got two older brothers and a younger sister, and grew up in the south of England. Was quite into sport, was quite a good, reasonably good footballer, and went off to do my degree in Liverpool, which I failed because I spent most of the time enjoying myself in Liverpool rather than going to lectures. But one big success was I met my wife. She wasn't obviously my wife at the time, but my wife now, Janet, when I was in Liverpool, and we've been married now for 34 years. And we have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, Michael, Daniel and Bethan. And the shock of not getting my degree and the responsibility of having 3 children really kind of got me into being much more diligent in terms of work than I was when I was at university. And I was very fortunate to work for some very smart people, and I learned quite a lot. And I progressed to a point where I worked for Fidelity, the investment house. I worked for Prudential, the UK insurer, and I worked for AXA, the insurance company. And then in 2012, I was recruited by Zurich to run the UK life business as the CEO of the UK life business. And that was all before I got diagnosed. My other claim to fame was that when I was at AXA, my job was around brand and marketing, and I persuaded the board to sponsor the FA Cup, which is the world's oldest football cup competition, and it was a tremendous thing to do, and got me into a situation where we saw AXA's brand awareness go up a lot, and I really understood a lot more about how sport and sport in the commercial word mixed as a result of that, which has played a part in some of the things I've done more recently. So that was me up until about 2012. And that was just before I got diagnosed. I was diagnosed in 2014.
How did that diagnosis impact you at the time?
Well, it was, to be blunt, it was, I kind of felt like I'd been living life in the outside lane, driving at, a fast speed. Everything had been going my way. 3 lovely kids, a great career. My wife has been absolutely brilliant throughout, Janet. And suddenly I found myself, there was no reason why, I should suddenly develop Parkinson's. I didn't really know what Parkinson's was. And I found myself going to first the GP because I developed a slight tremor. And the GP didn't know what the situation was, and asked me to go to a neurologist. And the neurologist basically sat me down and said, I think you've got Parkinson's. And I didn't really know what that meant. But I knew that, suddenly I'd gone from being a very fit, very healthy 48-year-old to I've got this degenerative condition. And I do really feel the way that a lot of people think about Parkinson's is, right, that's it, it's degenerative. So you will degenerate as a person, and that's it, your life's on a downward spiral, which I've since found just isn't the case. So it was like hitting a brick wall, actually. Really, suddenly I didn't know what was going to happen, and I found myself. I used to go running when I went to different countries that as part of the European management team, and I can remember we were in Lisbon as a management team, and I got up and I went running at about 5:15 in the morning, and I was just getting slower and slower and slower, and I was running along down by the tram lines in Lisbon, and I just I suddenly felt so tired, and I felt I couldn't really run, and I was sort of shuffling rather than running. And I got back to the hotel and I rang my wife, and Portugal's on the same time zone, but ringing her before 6 o'clock in the morning probably wasn't a good idea. And I just said, look, if this is what Parkinson's is all about, if this is, I won't be able to run, I won't be able to do all the things that I just don't know what I'm going to do. And Janet was brilliant. She just said, well, firstly, this is a long-term degenerative condition. And, you could run last week, so you can run this week. And you just got to focus on the things you can do rather than focus on what you can't do now. And she was absolutely right. And for me, it was the kick up the backside that I needed, because I hadn't realized it, but I'd allowed myself to get really drawn into this kind of vortex of, this is it, your life's going backwards and you won't be able to do things. And that was the turning point for me of just approaching the condition with a much more positive attitude. And I'm so delighted that I have done. I can't say I'm delighted I have Parkinson's, but there've been lots of brilliant things that have come with it, and a positive mindset has made a big difference to me.
That's great. So many people get stuck in that mindset of, woe is me, I can't do this, I can't do that. So sometimes it helps to have community or someone beside you to help you make sure those things are accomplished.
You're right, Crystal, and I think and it's difficult for doctors and neurologists. They've got lots of things, lots of people to see, etc. But we don't tend to think about the psychological impact of a diagnosis like this. And as I say, it just felt like the message I was being given was, it's time to give up. And I didn't want to give up. And most people who have Parkinson's or any other condition like that don't want to either. And I think I found that given the opportunity, people are incredibly supportive, and have helped me. I ended up being promoted to the group executive at Zurich, and ran for 3 years. I moved to Switzerland and ran the biggest biggest region in Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and bank distribution globally. And I did that because people showed that they had faith in me, and that they weren't going to treat me any differently because of the condition. And that meant that I didn't need to feel that I had to be different. And actually, I think recognizing that you're not infallible and that you are vulnerable, which we all are, actually helped me, I think, be a better leader and build better teams as a result.
Now you mentioned um, how there were a few new things you picked up along with the positive mindset. Two-part question. Do you want to maybe tell us a bit about what you gained after being diagnosed, and I guess sort of accepting it and letting it settle in? What did you learn about yourself? And second part, what did you learn about the world after being diagnosed?
Gosh, the second part's a big question. I think what I learned, if it's okay, I'll answer the second part first, if that's all right. But I think what I learned was that given the opportunity, people have an enormous amount of goodwill and support, and they want you to succeed. And that
Most
doesn't mean,
people,
yeah, most people, not everyone, but most people. And and I think I'm much more open. So what I've learned about myself is that it's made me much more open to different people, different skills, different mindsets, and recognizing that everyone in a team brings different things to the table, and that's been a real blessing from my perspective, because it's taught me a lot more about listening than it has a bit about always feeling you needed to know the right answer. I mean, I was working in a profession which is, has been quite a kind of
that's
alpha
a
male type.
difficult one, yeah.
Yeah, and it I think being vulnerable in that profession, I mean, I can't say that it gave me you understand these things fully, but when you're in a situation where you are vulnerable and you've got a condition which you can't control and that happened out of the blue, it gives you some empathy with how people feel when they have a claim on a critical illness policy, or you can't possibly put yourself in the customer's shoes entirely, but it can give you some sense of how challenging those situations are. And so I've learned a lot from that. I've also learned the big thing I've learned is I just don't believe that it's that you get defined by setbacks, and I don't think you get defined by opportunities. I think you get defined by how you choose to react to them. And I've seen people like Paul Mayhew Archer, who was a writer on a comedy show in the UK called The Vicar of Dibley, and his response to having a condition that is not ideal for stand-up comedians was to become a stand-up comedian. And I've seen people just walk towards the fire and benefit as a result. That's been an inspirational thing for me to be involved in. I've also learned that you really need to understand what it is that your skill or your advantage or your expertise is and what matters to you, because you can spend an enormous amount of time doing things that you're not good at or that you don't really find interesting. And I'm now fortunate enough, with the combination of being the chair of Parkinsons UK, the chair of the Z Zurich Foundation, which is a global charity, and the chair of England Athletics, I get to do things that I are really a privilege to be involved in, and and they really matter to me in a way that things did matter to me before, but not to the same depth as I can see the importance of the work that I get involved in and the brilliant people I work alongside now.
That's great to hear, Gary. I had a question, sort of I guess it's off on a tangent a bit, but I know you work for a global insurance company, and of course, we don't have to get into specifics of different company names and all that, but
Please don't.
But in your view, how are rare neurological conditions handled by insurance companies, and what could they do differently, and what could patients do differently to find something that will help them?
Gosh, that's a good question. I mean, I think one thing, I'm not an expert in this field, but I would say there's a kind of motto that, once you've met one person with Parkinson's, you've met one person with Parkinson's, because everyone has a slightly different version of the condition. And I think that applies to a lot of rare conditions. And the temptation is to kind of categorize people and put them into the same box. Yeah. And I think we owe it to do more to try and understand the individual. And there are some individuals for whom, deterioration will happen quicker. There are some individuals for whom it will have a much more of a physical effect. Some individuals will have much more of a mental health effect. And it could be three very different conditions almost. So I think that that for me seems to be an area of opportunity to improve. Also, it's long term. I mean, I've been diagnosed 7.5 years, and I would say I remember going on a whitewater rafting adventure in New Zealand, and I'd been 3 or 4 years diagnosed. And when I filled out the form and I put that I had Parkinson's, there was consternation of, should this person be allowed to do this? Should they not be allowed to do it? And I think increasing the awareness so that, there isn't a stigma that goes alongside having a condition. It's a reality, and we're going to have more people with long-term conditions as we have aging populations. And that awareness, I think the insurance companies have as much role to play as we all do as a society. So I think that's, for me, is a big part of improving things.
You're right. Education is definitely needed among people who have disabilities and neurological conditions, as well as those who don't, like insurance companies, doctors, all that. How would someone deal with a situation where they have lots of health challenges, which maybe they need financial assistance for, like from an insurance company, but every time they go to a doctor says, "I don't believe you," which a lot of us do face. Where they've been through all the tests, they're not getting a diagnosis, but yet they have these problems where they need money and they need help they need maybe a walker, and they can't get it because there's no test that will confirm that they have what they have.
Yeah, and that's a real problem. And I mean, just to put that into perspective, in the UK, the one of the key challenges is with people is the benefits that come with not being able to work in terms of support and grants and income replacement, etc., that comes from the government. And the fact is, you can be a person with Parkinson's who at 9 o'clock in the morning, you're fine and you can walk up and down, no problem. And at 11 o'clock, you're, unable to move. And we're working with, as Parkinson's UK, we're working with the government to try and improve the way that they manage these kind of benefit assessments. But we're also working with people and how you fill in the forms. And I'm not suggesting people should do anything other than be completely truthful, but they can expand and explain the situation in a better way, and it does make a difference. It doesn't make a difference all the time, but it does make a difference, and that's certainly something we do a lot of. And also that's one of the benefits of having groups that of people, so you have people who've been through the same process and can give advice to others about the information that's provided and what they need to reinforce and make sure is clear. But can I mention one other thing that I think about insurance companies and work is really important is I found there was quite an assumption that when you have a long-term condition that you'll stop work. And for some people that may be the case, but for some people, actually, and I was an example of that, working in a different way is the answer. And I think, as the UK as a society, and it's the same, I think, in the US and in Western Europe in particular, we've got an aging population. We're going to have to get smarter at allowing people to work in more flexible ways, allowing people to work in a way that fits them from a lifestyle and a health perspective. And the idea that you just constantly, go to a more senior level until you retire, I just don't think is the way that the future is going to be.
Or not even, I mean, by all means, we should adapt to whatever their needs are, but maybe also the definition of work needs to be looked at and changed.
I agree. People can be so productive and bring so much to an employer's environment, and they don't have to do it in a way that is necessarily traditional in terms of 9 to 5 in the office, in a particular role. Right. So
there are definitely people that do better, as you said, they do better in the morning. Him and I are one of those too, and then in the afternoon into the evening, it's, they can't be that productive anymore. Right. And it's mostly a physical thing, but also exhaustion. And so, mentally it can be an issue as well. And it doesn't mean you can't be productive and be just as as helpful as anybody else. You just need to do it in your own time period.
Absolutely.
Gary, you mentioned a positive mindset before. How do you deal with people like having a positive mindset and having to deal with people that don't share your viewpoint?
Oh, well, I love people who don't share my viewpoint, actually. I mean, if they don't share my viewpoint about positive mindset, that's more of a challenge. But generally, I think having different opinions is brilliant, and it's the best way to progress is to find people who have a different viewpoint and learn from them, and vice versa. I think I really struggle with what I call dementors, people who in the Harry Potter world kind of suck the life out of everything and find a way to explain to you why this is never going to work. And you need people who are realistic, you need people who ground you, but I think having a positive mindset and being an energy giver makes such a difference. People who come into a room and they're looking for solutions. So my answer to that is I try and find a common bit of ground to stand on with the person that I disagree with. But I'm now better than I was. I actually had a 360-degree review where one of my colleagues once said, Gary, we'll always find a common piece of ground to stand on, even when there isn't one. Mm-hmm. And I'm now better at understanding that you can't agree with everyone. And some people, they just won't be energy givers, they'll be energy sappers, and you just got to recognize that's the way of the world.
Right. There's some people who are negative for the sake of being realistic and being sort of just being guarded, which is one thing. But then there's some people that are negative just for being negative, just for the sake of being negative.
Yeah,
I
there's
will absolutely have a, not argumentative, but that's not my thing. But I will absolutely have a debate with you, even if we don't, we're not on the same page about it. But if you come at me and attack me, then I'm done. Forget it. You're too on your, you're too gung ho about what you want to happen and not listening to me on the same respectful level, then I'm done.
and I think that's fair enough. I mean, having respect for each other, I think, is absolutely fundamental. And I think having this condition has made me a slightly more reflective person than I was before. And it's made me realize that, when you're sat around having a meeting, the person who is reflective, who maybe just takes their time to come to a conclusion, how do you make sure they get their say as well as the person who would naturally come forward? And that chairing meetings, it's more of an art than people give it credit for, I think.
And so what are you working on now, or what have you got going on now?
Well, so I've been busy with England Athletics, Zurich Foundation, and with Parkinson's UK. All three really challenging but interesting points. I mean, the Zurich Foundation, we've been supporting a lot of work with, obviously with COVID and with Ukraine, as well as the three core areas we look at, which are flood resilience and climate resilience, mental well-being and social equity programs globally. And
Awesome.
it is brilliant, some of the programs that we'll be running. I mean, particularly from my point of view, when mental well-being is just, it's frightening to see that particularly young people in this world are losing confidence in the future of the world. And, you can make a real difference by supporting people preemptively and preventing the mental well-being issues becoming severe, and recognizing that there is a stigma around mental health, and we need to make it okay for people to say they're not okay. So that's a big part of what we're doing. We're working with UNICEF, for example, on that program. England Athletics, we've, in a similar way, linking physical health and mental health together, and providing a way for people to reach their potential and enjoy their lives through sport. I think it's a great thing to be involved in. And obviously we just had the Commonwealth Games, and you get exceptional performance, but this is about sport for everyone. And Parkinson's, we clearly, the problem we have is the main drug used for to manage the condition was actually developed before Neil Armstrong made it to the moon. There is no cure. The only thing that currently slows the condition down in a proven way is exercise, and a big part of my message is around exercise. I'm not necessarily exercise as extreme as the exercise I do, but exercise can make a difference to people, does make a difference to people, and I think that's something that the more the people can put themselves in control of the outcomes that happen, the better.
You had mentioned a while ago about younger generation being bogged down and kind of depressed about going forward. When the older generation, or the ones in the workforce now, when they're so, like we talked about previously, when they're so gung-ho about this is how it has to be and they're set in their ways, it kind of takes away the voice of the younger generation and gets them sad and depressed about my voice doesn't matter because they're telling me this has to be. So there has to be some kind of middle ground there, you know?
I think there's a really important thing about this. Comes back to respect, as you said, Crystal, before, you know, and I've been involved in what's called reverse mentoring, where you take someone who's maybe my age, mid-50s, and you share your experiences, but you learn from someone younger than yourself. And, you know, and this particular individual has been brilliant at teaching me about technology and communication, and, you know, the advances that have happened in the last 10 years in technology in particular are, you know, not easy for someone my age to keep up to date with. And, you know, I think you can learn from each other, but the challenges with technology are, you know, I mean, social media in particular creates lots of mental health issues around people's expectations of immediate response, immediate reactions. People, you can have all sorts of problems with online bullying and so on, and it's created a new environment which is tough for people to deal with at times, and we have to make it possible for people to share their concerns.
And then if you have the added, you know, difficulties of a disability, that's an even more, you know, of a situation that makes it more tough, because if you have dealt with the normal person that doesn't deal with the disability and they're feeling bogged down and depressed by those older generations, then you know, you have an even more of a problem when a disabled person feels like they're already, you know, because of their disability, maybe they're already feeling low or down and not very good about themselves or whatever. And then you have that situation, which we don't get, and no one in the world gets anywhere over that.
And it's also, it should be noted, it's also a lot tougher for someone with a disability, depending on the severity, to say, okay, well, I understand there's all this negative stuff on using technology and on the internet and whatever, but that's their only outlet to experience the world because they can't go anywhere, can't do anything else, then it becomes extremely tough.
Not saying that they can't go out and do stuff, but that is sometimes, depending on the disability, that is their primary way of communicating. And when they have that issue, it cuts, you know, a lot of communication away because they're afraid to say anything.
And I think this is where, for me, both understanding and communication become really key, because, you know, people have different situations, different circumstances, and I don't think most people generally want sympathy, but I do think they want empathy. And, you know, I just, you know, if I take myself as an example, and I'm not a great example of this, but, you know, I just want people to deal with me as I am, and I don't want them to pigeonhole me. I just want them to, you know, deal with me as an individual. And I see that with a lot of people, and I think it is difficult if you're, you know, being different in whatever way you are different is challenging in human society. The strange thing is, with sport, being different can actually be a real advantage. You know, people who are faster, who are more resilient, and actually, one of the things that is great about sport is, over the last few years, is, as you know, I mean, the Commonwealth Games for one of the first times bringing, you know, the para athletes into if you like, standard competition, I think that was a great move forward, because it positions people on the basis of who they are, rather than a separate competition that's somehow, you know, treating people as though they're second-class citizens in some way. So I think that we are making progress, but we've still got a long way to go. And the
Right.
best way to do is to listen and to communicate.
I'm very thankful for how far things have come in the disability world. But there's like, as you said, there's a lot more to accomplish. There's a lot more things that need to be looked at and recognized. Some of the things, you know, have definitely been, you know, out there, and they've been known to be law, but they don't actually do them.
And people understanding their rights is important. But I also
Right.
think we have a responsibility, and I'll tell you a very quick story, if you don't mind, about we have a responsibility to manage our own biases. I mean, I I entered into the London Marathon a few years ago, and I was going to get my bib, you know, the number at the expo that they have, and I was on a packed train at the DLR, the tube train that goes down to the Excel Centre in London, and I hadn't taken my medication, which is something I'm bad at doing. I leave it late, and I was stood there, and I had my hand up on a, you know, on the sort of hanging thing. I was stood in the middle of a crowd, and my arm was shaking, and I, you know, immediately I felt different, and I felt, you know, aware of people looking at me. And I looked up, and there was a guy who was sat down in his seat, who had shaved hair, he had tattoos down the side of his neck, and he was looking at me really aggressively. And I thought, you know, the last thing I need is, having been in this situation, is for someone to, you know, I've upset him somehow, I've probably looked at him the wrong way, I really don't need this problem. We stopped at the next station, some people got off, some people got on, he was still there, still staring at me. And then he stood up and he moved a couple of people out of the way and came over to me. And I thought, this guy's gonna, you know, is he gonna punch me? Is he gonna? And he basically just said, you look like you're having a bit of a problem. Would you like my seat? And I'd assumed, because he wasn't wearing a suit, which most people were, because he, you know, had tattoos, because he looked quite aggressive, just the way he was, I'd assumed something about him, which was completely false. And he was just a really nice person who was concerned about, you know, someone else on the train. And I think we have to judge people, you know, we all have to learn, myself included, to judge people on the basis of who they are, rather than what we happen to see or what we happen to be biased about.
Before we go here, Gary, I was wondering if people wanted to talk to you, how can they reach you?
Well, they can reach me by email, which is gshaug7741@aol.com, or they can put a message onto, I think we're going to have a link for my Gary's Challenges site, so you can put a message on that, which is a Facebook site. So either way would be fine. And you know, I mean, I should talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about some of the challenges that I've done and what I've learned from those sports challenges, because they, you know, I think I'd encourage people to get involved in that kind of thing as well. But the www.garyschallenges.com is probably the easiest place.
Okay. So we're talking about Gary's Challenges. What would be the thing you're most I guess, proudest about how it all started?
Well, gosh, if I tell you how it started, and then I can tell you what I'm most proud about. I said about me being in Lisbon, and that really gave me the kind of mindset to say I need to use my voice and the fact that I was reasonably well known in a business environment to make the point about what Parkinson's is and what it isn't, to raise awareness, to be a bit louder about it, and also to help raise some funds for a condition that needs funding for research. So I started off doing some running, and then I did 1 year I did four marathons and a wing walk, which involved standing on a biplane and doing a loop-the-loop. And then the trouble with this is, with someone like me, you then want to do more the next year. So the next year after that, we did several marathons, including the Jungfrau Marathon in Switzerland, which is about 25 kilometers flat and 17 kilometers up the side of a mountain. And then someone suggested to me, wouldn't it be great if we could break a world record? And unfortunately, I'm not good enough to break any world record held by Usain Bolt or anyone similar to that. But we found a three-legged world record for 24 hours, three-legged running. And a friend of mine, Andy Tucker, and I, first off, we tried the world record, but it was locked down. So we had to have a mannequin between us. And so then we did it again, and we managed 117 kilometers properly last October. But I said the thing that I'm most proud of, actually, Crystal, is that just the week before that three-legged world record, I ran the London Marathon with my family, and my three children and my wife Janet all ran it with me, and they've just been an absolute 4 rocks throughout this period. I mean, it's not easy having a parent who's got Parkinson's. It's not easy having a partner who's got Parkinson's, and watching them struggle with the condition, and they've been superb, and that was just a wonderful experience. And then this year, having done the world record, we had to come up with something better again. So I undertook a thing called Arch to Arc, which was running from Marble Arch to Dover, which is 85 miles in a day, rowing the distance across the channel, which was 30 miles, and then cycling from Calais to the Arc de Triomphe, which is 196 miles. And I did that with the support of just such a wonderful group of people and the Tadley runners. And, I think what I've learned through all of these challenges that I've taken on is just how brilliant people can be and are, and they don't have to do the sport to do it. There's a guy who lives in near Chicago, Joe Rock, who's driven the van for me when we cycled back across Europe. There's people who've made cakes for while we were doing the 24-hour three-legged walk, and people have just been superb, and it's really showed people at their best, and it's been a delight to have people's support, and been a delight to be able to be involved in these things.
That's amazing, Gary. Now I imagine there are some people listening or watching who hear about all you're doing and all you've done, and other people who may have done similar things, and they might get a bit intimidated, right?
Yeah.
Where do you recommend someone starts?
It's a great question. I mean, I don't, I wouldn't encourage people to see it as becoming a world record holder, particularly as I don't want anyone to beat my world record for the three-legged running. But there's a well-known sort of program in the UK that's from couch to 5K, and what it shows is that you can start at virtually any level, and I mean, sport for me should always be something you enjoy. It shouldn't be about, it happens to be motivating to me to push myself maybe more than the limit at times, but I think people should enjoy it. And if they walk a 5K, if they do gardening, if they take the dogs for a walk, if they, we can all do something, and it may be very difficult, and it particularly people who have conditions that are very limiting it, it can be very difficult, but exercise is just such a powerful enabler for people. And I think it's choosing your own objectives and your own reasons for doing it, and making sure that you do them for the right reasons, rather than because you feel obliged to, or because you feel that you have to do something. That exercise shouldn't be painful for most people.
And I think one of those right reasons which I'm hearing in what you've told us is that people should pursue whatever they want to do for the joy of doing it and the joy of practicing it and maybe getting better at it, instead of trying to chase the medals and the trophies and the applause and whatever else.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things, I come back to where we started, which is I feel very strongly that, having a condition, a long-term health condition, shouldn't mean that you're written off. And the worst thing is if you write yourself off, and I think that, whether it's exercise, whether it's art, whether it's poetry, having a condition does not have to mean that it's the end of your life from a perspective of enjoying things and being productive. And I think it's all down to you to choose what matters to you most. And you can't change everything, but you can change some things, and taking the control so that you define how you deal with the condition, I think makes a huge difference.
Yes.
I think you're right there.
Definitely.
Well, you guys are great examples as well, to be fair,
Thank you.
Yeah, well, no, I can speak for myself. I certainly can't speak for Crystal, but the way I started this podcast, or when I look for people to speak to, it's just like, this is something that people need, and and there's no reason to be afraid of doing something like this. I mean, it's foreign and I've never done it before, but that doesn't mean I have to be afraid of it. What it
I totally agree. I was on a different, have a different perspective on that. So I came into this, like I told you before, being a graphic designer previously. But I was also, I was so bogged down by, like we talked about previously, by older generations and people in the workforce, bogging me down and telling me I can't do this and I can't do that. Not just in work, but other areas too. And so my anxiety got really, really bad. And I had to go through a lot of self-realization and fixing on that. And so, when I met him, he had ideas about what he already had the podcast, but he didn't really have an idea of what direction he wanted to go for sure. And then I came up with my thing, what I wanted, and we kind of put them together. And like I told you before, you know, it was important that recognizing all the different things that disabled people were dealing with. In so many areas that needed to be fixed or needed voices to be heard. And so we wanted to give people a platform to be able to talk about what they're interested in and what their jobs are, or what their life is like, and what their hobbies are, and stuff like that. And so that people, other normal people, I hate using that term, but they will have a better understanding of how to make life easier for not only us, but for ultimately for them too, because what we can contribute, we can do, is going to be harder on them if they make our lives more difficult.
The general, sorry, Gary?
I was just going to say, but it's such a brilliant thing that you're focused on giving people a voice about, you know, about their story in a way that they're not getting that access generally. And I think that's, I mean, I talked about energy givers before, and you guys are energy givers, and it's infectious, which is good in a good way, which is good.
Thank you, Gary. There too many voices out there which are telling people with disabilities that they can't do things, or you have a disability, you're of lesser value, or whatever. And we're trying to change that narrative however we can.
And that's brilliant. And you know, and I think there are more voices who are doing the same. You know, there's a thing called PD Avengers now, which is a global group, which Larry Gifford was one of the founders of, and he's a from Canada, and you know, he's a communications specialist. I mean, people like Larry are making strides in getting the voice of people with Parkinson's across, and I think this is where, you know, it's so important that people have a place that they can be heard, and be recognized for who they are, not how they're labeled. And I think that's crucial. So I all credit to you guys for setting this up. I think it's great.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Yeah. Thank you, Gary, for taking the time to speak with us today. I know it's quite late over the pond over there.
Yes.
So
Been a really good conversation.
yeah.
It's great to talk to you, and I
Giving
hope
us a lot for people to listen to and take into account.
and if people want to contact me, I'm delighted to hear from them. And if I can help and share some of my experiences, very happy to do so.
Okay. Have a good night, Gary.
Good night.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you again.